All right, welcome back, guys. In the last video, we did a lot of the initial setup for our application. Now in this video, we're gonna go ahead and start tackling that custom user model and then seeing how we can migrate that model to our PostgreSQL database, which is gonna be our users database. So if I go in my settings, right here, we have this users database, which is this listings users database that we made in PostgreSQL in the last video. And then we also have this listings database. So in particular, with our custom user model, we want this database here to manage that model and all that data. So first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to close up this urls.py. I don't need that right now. Instead, I'm going to go inside of this user app we made, open up this models.py, and start working in here. So I'm going to remove this comment. I'm going to close that side window, close up that terminal, and then zoom in a bit. And then let's get working on this. So to create my custom user model, I'm going to need to import a few things. This is going to come from django.contrib.auth.models. I'm going to import abstract base user. I'm going to import permissions mixin, and I'm going to import base user manager. So these are all things I need in order to create a custom user model. And this is all stuff inside of the Django documentation on creating a custom user model. And we're going to see how to utilize these things. So first, I'm going to make my custom user model itself, which I'm going to call user account. You can call this whatever you want, but in my case, I'm going to call it user account since I think that makes sense. Then inside of here, I need to pass in the abstract base user and the permissions mixin. So I'm going to grab this, paste it into here, grab this, paste it into here. That way this user account inherits both of these. And then I'm going to go ahead and define some fields. I'm going to have an email field, if I can type. So email. And then this is going to be my models.email field. I'm going to set a max length to this, which is going to be 255. And I'm going to set it to be unique. So I'm going to do unique equals true. So that's my email field. So by default, the user model, it's going to be using a username field as its username, but I can overwrite this with the username field, and I can set that to be email instead, which is going to use this right here. Then I'm also going to have a name field. So I'm going to use a name, an email, and a password in order to sign up. So this is going to be a models.character field. I'm going to set the max length to be 255. And then this I also want to be a required field when you sign up. So the way I can do that is by setting some required fields, and I can do that with this required fields, and that's going to be a list where then I can pass in this name. So that way this is required when I register an account. Now also right here I have the Django documentation open just so we can take a look at some of this stuff. So if you look for custom user model in the Django documentation, you should find a page like this, and then if we scroll down, there's actually an example of the same sort of thing. So if I go down enough, if I can find it. So here we are, there's a full example. So you have to scroll down quite a bit to find this. But right here, it shows you the same sort of thing where you have a user model where you pass in this abstract base user, and you can also pass the permissions mixin. They don't actually do that in this case. They just use the base user manager and the abstract base user. And then right here, you can see these different fields that they set. So they have an email and a date of birth in their case. And then this date of birth is the required fields that they use here. The username field they use as the email. And then they also have an is active and is admin flag that they use. And then right here, they have this user manager that inherits from base user manager, where they have this create user, which creates a normal user, and also this create super user, which the only difference really is, like right here, you can see it does a self.create user, which is this right here. And then it sets this is admin to be true and saves that user and then returns it. Now, one thing you see right here is it uses this is admin. Although if you go into here where you actually can take a look at the user model, there actually is no is admin flag. There are an is staff flag, which designates whether this user can access the admin site. Then there's also an is super user flag. If I can find that, I'll just search for it. So is super user. And then this designates that the user has all permissions without explicitly assigning them. So a combination of this flag and this flag is what you can use to create a super user. And then as for the is admin, I'm not entirely sure if that's a typo here or if that's just some kind of flag that I'm not too aware of, but that's what they use in this example here. Although here, when you take a look at the user model itself, it doesn't actually show this flag anywhere. So anyway, that's what we're going to be using to create our super user, this is staff and is super user flag. So back in here, let's go ahead and continue on. So I'm going to create this, first of all, is active. This is going to distinguish whether this user is active and can actually log in. So I'm going to do a models.boolean field for this. And then I'm going to set the default to be true. Now, if you have an application where, let's say they receive an email, they have to activate their account, then maybe you might set this to something like false. And then once they activate their account, then this gets set to true. But in our application, it's going to be a little more simpler, and I'm just going to have this set as default to be true. And then I'm going to have an isStaff flag, and this is going to be another Boolean field, and by default, it's going to be false. So there we go. These are these two flags here. And now I'm also going to have one additional flag, which is going to be my isRealtor flag. So this is what's going to be used to distinguish a realtor and a normal user, and also an admin user, I suppose. And then this is also going to be a Boolean field. So I'm going to do models.Boolean field. And the default for this is also going to be false. And then if we take a look at the documentation here with their example, right here, they have this objects that they set to their user manager. And then this user manager is this right here where they have the different functions for creating the user. So we're going to do the same sort of thing. So back inside of here, right below this flag, I'm going to have an object property that I set to user account manager. And I'm going to instantiate that. And then this user account manager is a class I need to define. So right above here, I'm going to have a class of user account manager. And then I'm going to pass this base user manager to this so that it inherits it. And then I'm going to define some of these functions. So I'm going to have a create user function. And then here I'm going to pass in self. We're going to need an email, a name, and a password, which by default is going to be none. Because if you have a password of none, then the Django CLI won't actually create the user. And then inside of here, I'm going to have a check for if not email. Then I'm going to raise a value error. And it's going to say users must have an email address. So once again, this is just like they have right here. If not email, there is a value error where users must have an email address. And then the next thing we're going to do is we're going to normalize the email. So I'm going to have email is self.normalize underscore email, and then pass in the email. So this right here is going to normalize it and then reassign it to this email. So what normalizing is going to do is make it in lowercase. So if you had something like John Doe at gmail.com, then once you normalize it, this capital G is going to be changed to lowercase. Or if you had something like .com, it's going to normalize this to be .com like so. Now a little catch with this normalized email, let's say if I had a capital D right here. When you normalize, it's not going to change this right here. So in order to actually have it lowercase everything, what I can do is do email is email.lower. And then that way I can change everything to be lowercase. So that way it's a little bit further normalization, I suppose. Because by default, let's say if I had this and I had this right here, these would be two different accounts inside of this Django application. Even though case sensitivity isn't something that's done with emails, if you sent an email to this address here and this address here, it would be sent to the exact same email. But with Django, it treats these as two different accounts. So if you don't want that, you can add this right here. Then the next thing I'm going to do is user is equal to self.model. And then to create this model, I need an email. And then I also need a name. So there we are. And then I want to set the password. Now I don't want this to be a plain text password. So what I can do is user.setPassword, then pass in the password, and this will make sure to hash this password. So that way it's not stored in the database as plain text. And then I need to save this. So I can do a user.save. And then when you're dealing with multiple databases, then you have this using that is a property you can set and do self._db. So in our case, because we're using multiple databases, this is going to help us have this get saved to our correct database. And then finally, I'm going to return the user. So there we are. This is going to be our first function for creating our normal user. Next, I want to create my function for creating our realtor user. So I'm going to define create realtor. I'm going to pass in self, email, name, and password equal to none once again. And then here I'm going to do user is equal to self.createUser. So we're going to be utilizing this create user function right here. Then we're going to pass in our email, our name, and our password that were passed to this function right here. And then after that, it's going to create this user for us. So we're going to return it. So that way we can store it inside of this variable right here. And then once we have reference to it, I can do a user.isRealtor, set that to be true. So that way we're setting this isRealtor flag to be true for this realtor user. And then I can do a user.save and then do using is self._db, just like before. And I already explained this, so I won't explain it once more. And then finally, I'm going to return the user. And then we need one final function, which is going to be for creating our super user. So I'm going to do define create super user, pass in self, email, name, and password equals none. Then I'm going to do user is self.createUser, pass in email and name and password. and then I'm going to do a user.isSuperUser, and I'm going to set that to be true. So remember, once again, we're utilizing this create user function, which is this one for creating our normal user. We're going to save that, return that user, and then we're going to have reference to that user here, where then we can set the isSuperUser flag to be true, and we can also set the user.isStaff flag to be true. So this isStaff flag is going to let this user to log into the admin panel, and this isSuperUser flag is going to give this user admin permissions. And then the next thing I want to do is do a user.save, and then I'm going to once again have this using isSelf._db, and then return the user. And there we are. We have our 3 functions now in place. And then down here, I'm just going to have one more function I define here, which is going to be the string representation of this user account model. So I can do that with str. So _str_, pass in self, and the string representation of this is going to be self.email. So these emails have to be a string. So this email field right here is just a character field that has some additional validation checks just to make sure that it's an email. And there we go. Now we have our custom user model fully created here. So the next thing we have to do is make these migrations. So I can do that with Python manage.py make migrations. And then of course there's one thing I forgot to do. So let me close this up, go into my settings, scroll to the bottom. So when you create a custom user model, you also need to pass this auth user model field right here, and then put the path to our custom user model. So let me open up that side window. So the path to this is going to be user and then .user account, because in our model, we called this custom user model user account. So again, you can call this whatever you want, but you just have to make sure that you refer to this name correctly when you're referring to it right here with this setting. So I'm going to do user.user account in my case, but if you called your custom user model something else, make sure to put the correct name right here. So I'm going to save that, open up my terminal, run my make migrations once again. And there we go. We created our model user account. Now, I can't migrate to my PostgreSQL database quite yet, because remember, our default database is empty. So if I close this up, go to my database settings, if I do a migrate right now, it's going to try to migrate to this. But we want to migrate to our user's database, so we need to have a router in order to accomplish that. So let's now see how we can create this router. So to manage routers, we have a setting that we can use, which is database_routers. And this is going to be a list, and then this is going to be a path to our router. So we can have multiple routers. I'm going to have one for my user, so that's going to be for the user app, and then also one for the listing app. So what I put in here is going to be the path to it. So the way I'm going to do this is inside of my user, I'm going to create a file, which I'm going to call router.py. And then this is where I'm going to put in that class, and then that's going to be a class, which I'm going to call authRouter. And for now, I'm just going to have it like so. I'm going to go back here. I'm going to put in the path to that. So in quotes, I'm going to have user. So that's the name of my app. Then dot, the name of my file, which is router. And then dot, which is authRouter. So that's my authRouter class. And then once I create my listing router, I'm going to have it here as well. So for now, I'm just going to have this one route. Then I'm going to go to this router, and let's start to define this. So the first thing I'm going to do is, I guess, close that side window. And then after that, I'm going to have an attribute of route app labels. And I'm going to pass in user. So this user right here is my user app. So this right here. So it has to be the same name. And then there's going to be a couple of functions that we can define here. So this is all inside of the Django documentation. So the first function I'm going to define is db_for_read. I'm going to pass in self, model, and then hints like so, which is a keyword argument. So this db for read is going to make attempts to read from our user model, go to our user database. So that's what this right here is for. And then the way that we can make that happen is with an if check, where I do model._meta.app_label in self.routeApp_labels. Then I'm going to return users. Otherwise, I'm going to return none. All right, so what's going on here? This return users, what this is going to do is it's going to return our users database. So we called this specifically users like this. So inside of this router, you have to make sure you spell this the exact same. So this right here is going to check the model that we're trying to read from. Is it inside of our route auth labels, which is this right here, which is going to have our user app. So is this model within this app? If it is, return this database. This database is where we're going to read from. Otherwise, return none. So that's how this works right here. Next, I'm going to define db for write. So this is going to make it so that attempts to write to our user model, these are going to be routed to our user database. So once again, here I pass in self, model, and then our keyword argument of hints. And then as for the logic inside of here, it's going to be the exact same as this. So once again, if the model we're trying to write to exists inside of our route auth labels, which our route auth labels has our user app, then we're going to return our user's database, and that's where our writes are going to be directed to our user's database. Now the next thing I'm going to define is allow relation. I'm going to pass in self, object1, object2, and then my keyword argument of hints. So this is going to allow relations if a model in the user app is involved. So remember that in Django, in the last video, I explained that cross-database relationships are not supported in Django. So this is going to make sure that my relations that happen in my models are happening in the context of this route auth labels, which includes my user app. So only models in my user app are going to be allowed to have relationships between them. Or I guess another way to put it is also that our user database relationships can happen in the user database only with models defined in this user app. So the way that I can accomplish this is with an if check, where I can check if object1._meta.app_label is in self.route_app_labels, or object2._meta.app_label is in self.route_app_labels. And then if that's the case, I'm going to return true. Otherwise, I'm going to return none. So this right here is going to ensure that relations happen if a model in the user app is involved. So now the next thing I'm going to do is define allow migrate. I'm going to pass in self db app label model underscore name equal to none, and then my keyword argument of hints. So again, all this stuff, I know it's a little confusing, but this is all stuff in the Django documentation. That way you actually know what you're supposed to pass in here. That's how I know. So this right here, this function is going to make sure that the user app only appears in the user database. So that way when we do our python manage.py migrate, that migration is going to go to our user database. So I can do that with if app label in self.route_app_labels. Then I can return db is equal to users. So it's going to be a check right here. That's going to result in either true or false. And then I can return none otherwise. So if this app label appears inside of our route app labels, then we're going to do this check right here. And then if it passes, then we're going to migrate to the database. So there we are. We just defined our auth router. Also, I should not have parentheses here. That was a little mistake I just noticed. When you define a class, you do not want to have parentheses here. So anyway, now that I have my auth router class created, now let's open up the terminal. I'm going to clear things up, and now I can migrate. So I can do that with python manage.py migrate, and then I want to put the name of my app, which is user, and then to determine the database to migrate to, I can do that with this double hyphen database equals, and then the name of my database, which is users. And then I can click enter to that. That's going to apply my migrations. So this is going to be users because that's what I defined this to be. Where is it? Right over here. All right, so now that we migrated this, what I can actually do now is I can open up PostgreSQL. I can open up a session in there, and then I can list out my databases. So these are the ones I have. So right now I migrated to this listings users. So I can connect to this database with this \c listings_users. So now I'm connected to this database, which means now I can list out these tables with \dt. So now I see all these different things right over here that got migrated. And then this user account. So this table right here is where I'm going to see my different user accounts. So right now, if I do something like a select star from user_user account and then a semicolon, right now we don't have anything inside of here, but at least we can see how this data is stored. So if I expand this a bit, see we have the ID, the password, last login is super user flag, email name is active, is staff, and is realtor. So this is all that data that's going to get stored whenever we create a new user. So I can press Q and then \Q to exit out of here. So I just wanted to demonstrate that. I'm going to close this up. So now let's go ahead and create a super user. So I can do that with python manage.py create super user. So create super user, click enter. I can put in the name. So I'll do something like Bryan at listings.com, press enter. And what is this? So if we take a look at this error message, we see this Django.core.exceptions improperly configured, settings.databases is improperly configured. Please supply the engine value. So why is this happening? Well, because when we try to create our super user, we're trying to store it in this default database. So what we need to do is we have to specify where we want the super user to get stored. So just like we saw with our migrate, we also have to pass this _database equals users when we create our super users. So we're going to have it like so. Python manage.py create super user _database is equal to users. And that's what's going to make this admin user get stored inside of this users. So let's go ahead and click enter to this. Now I'm going to put in the email. So Bryan at listings.com, click enter, put in the name. So I'm going to have Bryan. I'm going to have a password. I'm going to type it again. And there we go. Super user created successfully. All right, so now that we have our super user created, now I can run my server. So there we are. And then I can navigate and I can open up localhost 8000 and then /admin/. So that's going to open up this admin panel where then I can log in with my super user. So Bryan at listings.com, put in my password, click enter. And what is this? Settings databases improperly configured. Please supply the engine value. Check again for more details. So it looks like we created our super user, but we still cannot log in. So let's go ahead and see why that is. Well, that is because in this router, we need to pass some additional settings. So this DB for read and DB for write. So remember, this makes it so that attempts to read or write the user models goes to the user database. Now this right here is checking for this model._meta.appLabel if it's in this self.routeAppLabels that we put here. Now this right here includes only our user app. So what we need to do is we need to pass a couple more things inside of here. So let's first pass in our admin. So that's a good start. So if we pass the admin in here, then that way when we try to read and write, then it's also going to allow our admin to have read and write access to our user database. So now let's go ahead, refresh. So it appears that we're still having issues here. So this admin, it has dependencies on some other apps that we also have to include here. One of which is content types, and another of which is sessions. So we need to include these apps right over here. Now with that, when we refresh, now we have this Django session does not exist. So this is now a whole different error. So why is this error showing up? Well, let's open up our PostgreSQL shell. So I'm gonna double click on this. And then I'm going to connect to my listings. So I'm going to do a /c listings users. So now I'm connected. And then I can list out my tables. So here I see that I don't have my sessions migrated. So that's what's happening right here. So relation Django session does not exist. So I need to make sure I bring those migrations into this database. So how I can do that is first off, I can stop running this. I'm going to clear. Then I'm going to do a Python manage.py migrate. So previously when we did our migrate, we passed in this user app and then selected our database. But in this case, I'm not going to select this user app. I'm just going to do a migrate to my database, which is going to be my users database. So again, users is this right here, which is this database. So now I can click enter and I'll see that some migrations got applied. And I also see this applying sessions. So now when I rerun, so I'm rerunning my server. And then also, if I open up the shell here and do a /dt, now what I'm going to see is I got this Django admin log and also this Django session that got added here. So now if I go back here and I refresh, there we go. Now we are finally able to be logged into our admin panel. Now we don't see our user model here because we didn't register it to the admin yet. That's something I'm going to show in a future video. But I just wanted to show some of these little gotchas that you have in order to actually have all this working with the admin panel so that you can even log in the first place. And then one last thing to just kind of clarify, we do need to have both of these in here. So let's say right now, if I were to once again test this out after making those migrations, if I go back here and I refresh, we once again see the settings databases is improperly configured. And then let's say if I pass in just my sessions, and then I save here, I refresh, so everything's fine. But what if I go and check out this groups? Now I get the settings.databases is improperly configured once again. So when I actually go to view this content, I get that error. So the same thing would happen if I register, let's say, my custom user model in here and my listing model in here. If I don't pass in the content types, then I'm going to get that issue. So we have to make sure we pass all of these inside of my route auth labels. That way we don't have any issue when we register for a user, log in with a user, and also do anything with our admin user and the admin panel. So there we are. That's everything I wanted to cover in this video. And then in the next video, we're going to see how we can create our listing model and then migrate that to the listing database. So anyway, hope you guys enjoyed the video. If you haven't yet, please hit that like button. It goes a long way to help a channel like mine grow and get recognized so others can benefit from the videos I release as well. Also, I have links in the description that you can check out. I have one for an e-commerce course that you can check out if you're interested in learning to develop an application like that. I also have a link for joining my Web Development Kings Facebook group. That way, if you want to personally ask me something, then you can go right ahead and do that, and I will happily help you out. It doesn't cost you anything, so if you're scratching your head about something, then you can go right ahead and ask me to help you out. Only questions I probably won't answer are if you want me to help you build some kind of personal project, as I don't quite have the time for that sort of thing, but anything else is fair game. You can also post something in the group itself. That way, other developers in the group can help you out with something as well. The group is all about growing your expertise as a developer, so if you're interested in that, then go right ahead and click that link in the description and join the family. Also, if you haven't yet, hit that subscribe button, turn on those notification bells. That way you don't miss out when I release a new video, and I'll see you in the next one.